Okay. All right. Okay. So, welcome to Introduction to Web Development, Lesson 7. We're only 3 lessons away from the end of this course, but today we're gonna talk about JavaScript. Today's Introduction to JavaScript. So, we're gonna cover some introductory concepts and some very basic JavaScript syntax. As always, this video is going to be recorded and posted on the Alphademic YouTube channel. Yeah, so the past few lessons, we've been only covering HTML and CSS, right? That stuff is, HTML is used for markup, right? We add structure and the content to a web page. CSS, we use to make it look good, right? So today we're going to be covering, in the next few lessons, we're going to be covering JavaScript, and you'll see what that is. So this lesson, we'll just be covering a few points. What JavaScript is, the difference between JavaScript and Java, and then why should we use JavaScript, and some very basic JavaScript variables and operators. And today is going to be a relatively short lesson because it's just introduction to JavaScript. So yeah. So first off, what is JavaScript, right? JavaScript is a programming language that was created by a guy named Brendan Eich in 1995. So he worked at a company called Netscape. Netscape was a old internet company back in the 1990s. I think it went bankrupt or something, but I don't think it exists now. But they used to be really popular. So at the time, Brendan Eich, who was working at Netscape, he was ordered to create a programming language which would make web pages less static. So if you remember, HTML was created in 1993. At the time, I don't think there was even CSS at the time, but at the time there was only HTML and web pages, right? It was badly designed, really boring. So Netscape, being the internet company, they wanted to advance the field, right? So they ordered Brendan Eich to create a language which would make web pages less static. And remember that static websites are websites that have very little interaction or functionality. They just have the information and the structure and the content inside the website. So basically, viewers only just read stuff on there or maybe click a link or two. They can't really do anything else on that website. So JavaScript was created so that the websites would be less static, so that there could be more interactivity and you could do more things on websites. So originally the language was called LiveScript, but then 3 months later they changed the name to JavaScript because at the time the programming language Java, which is different, was very, very popular. So they changed the name to JavaScript so that they could sound popular too. And so JavaScript is a client-side programming language. So what does client-side mean? Client-side means the code is executed when the viewer visits the website on the viewer's computer. And that's versus server-side. Server-side languages are executed on a web server that's not on the viewer's computer, it's somewhere else. And then it's sent via the internet to the viewer's computer where the viewer can see the content. So server-side languages are like PHP, which is another scripting language, and then Python for web. Python's another programming language. So basically JavaScript, you could say it runs on the viewer's computer, versus other languages, server-side languages, are executed in a server in a remote location, and then that content is sent to the viewer's computer. And also, you should know that JavaScript is what we call a, quote, real programming language. So a real programming language, well, you might be wondering, well, isn't HTML and CSS real programming languages? Technically speaking, HTML and CSS are not real programming languages. HTML, hypertext markup language, and CSS are markup and style sheet languages. So we use them to give structure to a web page and stylize it. It's not really used to program anything. And so you might be wondering, well, how do you know if something is a, quote, real programming language? So there's a term called Turing complete here. That basically means so there used to be a machine called a Turing machine, which can like process numbers and stuff. I won't go into that much detail, but it can process numbers and do stuff running through it. So the criteria for a programming language is if that language can do what a Turing machine could do, then it's considered Turing complete, and therefore it's considered a programming language. So for example, processing numbers. Can you add numbers in HTML and CSS? You can't have the program, you can't use HTML, write something that will add up two numbers, right? But you can do that in JavaScript, for example. That's how you process numbers, right? So that's why JavaScript is considered a real programming language. Yeah, so, yeah. And also another big misconception is that JavaScript is the same thing as Java, right? No, JavaScript is a completely different language compared to Java, right? JavaScript was created for web development, specifically to make websites less static, right? Java is a different language. It's used to program apps, computer applications, video games, and other stuff. For example, Minecraft, the game, was programmed using Java. And so they're used for different purposes. They're not the same language. They have different syntax. So you shouldn't confuse the two. They're not the same thing. So we're going to be learning JavaScript in this class, not Java, because we use we use JavaScript for web development. And then also, technically speaking, you can use Java to make websites, and you can use JavaScript for applications or apps, but they're not designed for that. And generally speaking, it's easier and simpler to just use JavaScript and Java for their intended purposes. Yeah, and like I said before, JavaScript was named JavaScript because Java was really popular at the time, and JavaScript wanted to be cool too and name it that way. Yeah, so don't confuse JavaScript and Java. They're two different programming languages. And then next, why JavaScript, right? Like I said before, we use it to make web pages less static and more interactive. What does that mean? That means that the viewer can interact with a website. So a viewer's actions can modify the content of a web page or the structure of it while they're viewing it. So they can do more stuff with that website, interact with it, and the website can contribute more. Yeah. So as an example, in JavaScript, you can use it to select any element, attribute, or text content from an HTML code and then modify it based on a viewer's actions. It's kind of like the CSS selector. You can select different elements in the HTML and then change them. So instead of being like CSS, where you use a selector to target an HTML element and then stylize it, you're not really changing anything. You're just making it look better. In JavaScript, you can target and select those HTML elements and actually change the content in it based on conditions and the viewer's actions. So for example, I have these examples here. If a button's pressed, you can make the text change into a different text, or you can change the image after the button's pressed. Or if a cursor hovers over something, you can make something else happen. Basically, just make it much more interactive. And basically, if you look at all the most popular websites today, almost all the websites that you guys visit probably today use some sort of JavaScript in them, because static websites are just boring and nobody likes them. So if you're looking into going into the web development world, or if you like making your own websites, then you must know JavaScript to make your websites up to today's standards. And next, I have an image that it's like an analogy that shows what the three web development languages are for. HTML is just bare bones. It's the content. It's the structure of this guy. CSS gives it good looks and makes it colorful and stuff. Good look. And then JavaScript gives it functionality. You see, HTML only has bones. JavaScript gives it muscles, and with muscles, it can do things. A human can do things. So the same thing for coding. HTML provides the basic structure and content of the web page. CSS stylizes it, and JavaScript gives it increased functionality to do things. And also, before we start learning JavaScript, especially if you don't have experience in real programming languages like Python, Java, C, C++, C#, whatever, then learning the real programming language JavaScript will be pretty hard. So you might, if you don't have any experience in coding before, you probably also thought that HTML and CSS was hard, but learning a programming language like JavaScript will be even harder. So just be aware of that. And I also like to emphasize that when programming in a programming language is not like how you and I speak in real life, right? In real life, we just speak and we can understand each other in English, right? But when you're programming something, you must write the language, write the code in a way that the computer can understand. So you have to give it a logical list of instructions that it has to follow and it can understand, so that you can achieve your goal. So you must, quote, feed the instructions, step-by-step instructions to the computer. That being said, you can't just type some do something into the code editor and then expect the computer to understand. You have to type it in the language that the computer understands, and in a way that the computer understands. It's just like if you went to a different country that speaks something other than English, and you try to communicate to them in English, then the local people will probably not understand you because you're not speaking in their language. Same thing for computers. You have to tell the computers what to do logically in a language that they can understand. And like I said, a computer by itself is very stupid. It can't do anything by itself. It doesn't have a brain. It can't think. It can't do anything. You have to give it step-by-step instructions in a logical manner so that it can do something. And once you give it, if you give it good instructions to do, then it'll do what you want, and it may even do it better than you as a human could do. So just be aware of that. Yeah, so what is a script, right? We're talking about JavaScript. So what is a script? like I said before, a script is a logical series of instructions that the computer can understand and follow in order to achieve a desirable goal. So this image is an example, right? It's how to make French toast, right? It gives you as a human step-by-step instructions to do in English so you can understand. Right? Step 1, you gather the ingredients. Step 2, combine the milk and eggs. Step 3, blah, 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 blah. And then in the end, you have your goal achieved, right? You have to give the computer step-by-step logical instructions on what to do using the language that the computer understands, right? So that is what a script is. Also, another concept, what is an object? What is a property, right? So in a lot of programming languages, including JavaScript, we can create these things called objects. And objects are basically different types of things, right? That represent maybe real things in real world. And so, for example, you could have houses and cars, right? Those are two different types of objects. House, right? If you look around, you have your house, you have your neighbor's house, you have your other neighbor's house, you have your friend's house. They're all considered houses, right? But they're different. And so objects, which are these things like houses and cars, can also have properties, which are the characteristics of that object. So for example, for different houses, they might have different prices, different number of bedrooms, different number of garages, whatever, different colors. And you'll notice that if you look down your street, you have your house, you have your friend's house, you have your neighbor's house, whatever. They're all, again, like I said, they're all the same type of thing. They're all houses, but they're different because of their properties. So your house might have 5 bedrooms. Your neighbor's house might only have 3 bedrooms. Your other neighbor's house might have 6, but they have different properties and different property values. Same thing for cars, right? You might have a Toyota Sienna or something, and they might have a Honda something, right? They're both considered cars, so they're both of the type car, but they're different types of cars, right? Like your car might have 6 seats in it versus their car might have only 3 or 2. And your car might cost $2,000, their car might cost $1 million, right? So these are 2 types of cars, and the cars have several properties, right? They have number of seats, they have the price, they have whatever, and then these different cars can have different property values for them. So that's just a real world example of what objects and properties are. In coding, when you're in programming something, you could have like an object that represents, let's say it represents an item in a store, right? You can have several properties for that object, right? The type is a store item. The name of that specific store item is, let's say it's a water bottle. The name of a different type of store item, it's still a store item, but it's a different thing, might be like a pencil, right? And then you might have different properties for it, like prices. It might have different prices, different places you put in a store, sales, discounts. So that's like another real world example. Now, so objects can also have methods written for them. So methods represent like something that happens to that object. Maybe you want, if you run this method, maybe it'll change the price of that car, or maybe it'll change the owner of the house so that a different person lives in a house. So methods do something to that object or its properties. You can say it's like the behavior of that object. like for example, you could program a human, right? But if you just program a human figure in a game, it'll just stand there. It won't do anything. You could add properties to it, like skin color, or like how much hair they have, if they're a boy or girl. Those are different properties you can give it so that it looks unique, right? And then you can give it a behavior, which are the methods, right? The behavior, you could make the human walk forward a few steps, or walk backwards, or shake hands with another human. So that's the behavior or methods. And I have a diagram here. So objects have a state and behavior, right? State is basically the characteristics, or like I said, properties, right? You have objects, and then you have property values, and then you have a behavior, which are the methods, right? So in this case, we have the object dog, right? And you can have different dogs. They're all types of dogs, but they're still dogs, right? They might have different states, right? All dogs have a name, or the ones that you own might have a name, a breed, a height, weight. These are all the properties of that dog, of dogs in general. Now, a unique dog might have a different name, a different breed, a different height, different weight from another dog, but they're all types of dogs. And then you also have behavior like methods, right? They do something. For example, the eat method might make the dog eat something, or run might make it run. So that's just a brief overview of what an object, property, and method is. There's also an event, right? What is an event? An event is basically just like what it means, right? It's just something that happens. Maybe something happens to that object. Maybe the user clicks something, clicks a button. That's an event, something that happens. And then you can program in your code, you can make the program do something where if this event happens, then this will happen. For example, you could have an event where target specifically when a person, a viewer of a website, clicks on a button. Then you could write in your JavaScript code, you could say, when the viewer clicks on this button, that's the event, then we will change the color of the text, and that's a reaction or an action. So that's for example, your reaction could be a method, right? It'll do something to change the your content. So that's just a brief overview of some basic concepts. Next, we're going to cover some basic JavaScript code. And for some questions, can you make a search bar using JavaScript? Yeah, we'll make a search bar in a few lessons. Yeah. Okay, so the first real JavaScript thing that we're going to be learning are JavaScript variables. If you've done a different programming language before, then you should know what variables are, right? Variables, basically, they're memory addresses. Whenever you create a variable, it'll automatically assign or reserve a little bit of memory in your computer to store that little bit of data. Temporarily, stored temporarily in your memory. And why do you want to make variables? Well, you want to make variables so that you can reuse that data. You can reuse that data in your code. So instead of having to make a new variable every time, you can just reuse that previous variable if you already had it assigned to a value that you want to get. And then you can access a variable by calling the variable name. So in JavaScript, there are several different types of variables. Today, we're only going to be covering a few primitive types, and you'll see what the difference between that and objects are. So in JavaScript, there's three main primitive variable types. We have numbers. The numbers type is just any number, right? 1, 2, 3, -1, -5, 1.1, 3.14, whatever. It can store any type of integer, whole number, decimal number, any type of number. Now, strings are different. Strings store text, right? So the letters of the alphabet. Maybe it could also store letters and numbers combined, or some symbols like a $sign. So strings store text. Booleans is a variable type that only stores two values. It only can store a true or a false value. So it's like a light switch. You can either turn it up, on, or off. Only two options. And you might be wondering, like, why should we? That sounds stupid. Why should we use such a variable which can only store two values? And you'll see later in later lessons that actually Booleans are very, very, very useful when we're doing conditional statements and loops and stuff like that. So yeah, so and I'll demonstrate the syntax for declaring a variable next. So if you guys will open up REPL.it, don't open up your previous example website. I'm just going to create a new REPL that's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, just for example. So we're going to be starting off blank. We'll be coming back to our previous example website in later lessons, but today we're just going to be working off of a blank web page. So if you create a new REPL that's for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, REPL is very convenient. They automatically link a JavaScript file to your HTML page, so we don't need to do that. So today we're just going to be working off of the JavaScript file here. And next lesson, we'll learn different ways you can implement JavaScript into your code, into your HTML file. But today we're just going to be working straight off of the JavaScript file, so script.js. And yes, we're making a new REPL.it just for today. Next time we'll come back to our old one, but today we're just going to be working off of this. So how do you declare a variable, right? The first thing that you have to type so that the computer will recognize that the next few characters are going to be declaring a variable is the keyword var. Var is a keyword that tells the computer that, okay, the rest of the line or the next few characters will be declaring a variable, right? We have the variable name, and the name can be almost anything you want, right? You can just name it A, you can name it John, you can name it Apple, whatever you want to name it. Almost everything. So I'll just name it A. When you're creating a name for a variable, the first character in the name must be either a letter, an underscore, or a $sign. You can't have anything else starting off the name. You can add like numbers and stuff afterwards. For example, var1 has numbers, but you can only start off the first letter with a letter, a $sign, or an underscore. Next, after we have, so what we've done here is this is a declaration. This declares a variable. This reserves a spot in our computer's memory for a little bit of data. It's reserved. So this is a declaration. We can, and by the way, for all statements in JavaScript, we end off with a semicolon. That tells the computer that that statement is ended. So this is just a simple declaration. Right now, the variable has nothing stored in it. It's undefined, its value is. So it's reserved a little bit of memory for us for this variable, but it doesn't have anything to do, have anything to store in it. So how do you make it like actually store a piece of data? You can instantiate it. So since the variable name is a, you can put a there to say that a, and then next we have an equal sign. The equal sign is what is known as an assignment operator. So an assignment operator is an equal sign. Basically says that whatever variable name is on the left side, we're going to assign a piece of data to that variable. So in this case, let's just give it a number, right? And then we always end off with a semicolon, right? We'll just put the number 5. So now we've declared a variable. We've said, okay, let's reserve this little space, like little piece of memory in our computer for this variable because we know we're going to use it. And then next, we're going to assign an actual piece of data to that variable so that it can be stored. So in this case, we're storing the number 5. That's a little bit of data. And then, so you can do that. Another way you can create and assign a little piece of data to store is instead of just doing it on 2 lines, what you can do is you can declare the variable and then instantiate it immediately. So how do you do that? After the var a, you have an equal sign, the assignment operator, and then you have the data that you want to assign it right there. And in this case, I'm assigning it a number type. So number types are like 5, 5.1, like negative 5.1, basically any number. So these are number types. And this is a JavaScript comment, so 2 slashes, number types. We can also have, remember, there's also the string type, right? Remember that string stores text. So let's declare another variable and let's call it t just to continue. And then we have the assignment operator again, right? Now, how do you assign a string to that? To assign a string, you have to enclose your whatever you want to assign in quotes. So let's say hello world. So now the variable d holds the text hello world. So that's a string type. And then we have booleans. Var e equals booleans. You can only assign true or false. So in this case, we'll have true, or we can have false in that case. So we have boolean type. One thing though, for these variable names, you can name it anything you want, except for the exceptions that I listed before. But what you don't want to do is name 2 variables the same name. Like you don't want to do that. That'll create an error, right? So name them different names. And another thing is JavaScript names are case sensitive. So what does it mean? That means that uppercase is different from lowercase. So we can have an uppercase a here, and we have a lowercase a here. They're different variables. And finally, another thing is that around operators like these, the JavaScript has white space collapsing for operators. So you can add spaces here in between operators and other readable or it's more neat, or yeah, it's just personal preference. So, okay, so somebody asked me a question. Why do you have to put the variable type before listing the variable? I don't understand your question because JavaScript is a loosely typed language. So you actually don't have to explicitly state what the variable type is. In fact, don't do that because JavaScript will just get confused if you do that. So we just say var a equals 5. That just says that this is a variable. This is a variable. This is a variable. We don't say like in Java, which is, like I said, a different programming language. In a lot of different programming languages, we have to specifically state what data type this is. So in Java, this is what we would do. We would just type string, the name, and then that. But in JavaScript, we don't actually have to say that. We can just say var, and the computer will automatically determine what data type this value is. So that's a convenience thing that JavaScript has given us because it's loosely typed. So we don't need to specifically state what data type this is. We can't, like in Java for numbers, there's actually different number types in Java. There's int for integers, and then double or float for decimal numbers. Okay, so another question. Why do I have to put this here? You don't have to put that there. That's a comment. That's a JavaScript comment. So remember, comments are not read, or they're not read by the computer, right? You only put comments there so you as a programmer can tell. So in this case, I'm just putting these comments here so that you guys who are listening to this lesson can see the different types there. You don't actually have to put this in front of it. I'm just doing that just for the lesson. Yeah. So those are the most basic types, right? We also, next we have different output types. So how do you make it print something, right? In this case, we're either going to be printing into the web page directly, so we make the web page have some text, or we make this blue box is called the console, or we make it print something into the console, and the console is not seen by the viewer when they go onto your website, but you use the console mainly as a programmer for debugging purposes. If you have a lot of code and a lot of functions in it and you have some problem. So there's several different ways you can output something. You can do document.write. What this does is it'll just write something into your web page, right? For example, let's say we wanted to have the text hello world in our web page. We just write the variable d. In this case, the variable d stores the text hello world, and if you run, you'll notice that the text hello world comes up. It'll just write into the document or the web page this text. You could also do the same for numbers. That in that case will be 5, and decimal numbers too. So we use that to write something. We can also create an alert window. So an alert window will create a pop-up window that in the viewer screen. That's an alert, right? Window.alert. And remember, always end off your statements with a semicolon. And then let's say you want to alert hello world. If you run, you'll notice we get this pop-up window that says hello world. That's the text that we want. And then finally, we have console.log. this will print something into your console. So let's print hello world into our console. Okay, it'll do that first, and then it'll print this into the console. And you'll notice now down here it prints that text. So usually we use the console just as programmers to see what's happening in our code, or to make it more clear what's happening in our code. Yeah, so those are three basic types of outputs. Okay, let's read some questions here. In JavaScript, can you put numbers as variables instead of letters? I'm assuming you mean for the variable names, right? For variable names, you can include numbers in the variable name, but what you can't do is you can't have a number start off a variable name. You can't do that. That's illegal. You can do this though. You can have a letter and then a number for the rest of the variable name. You just can't have the first character of the variable name start off with a number. It has to be a letter, an underscore, or a $sign. Those are the three allowed characters for the first character of a variable name. Yeah. So next, we've talked about the variable types. We've talked about the basic outputs. Let's talk about some arithmetic operators. So in math class, you know, there's addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and exponentiation, so to the power of, right? So we can use these operators to add stuff or do whatever. For example, let's say we wanted to create a variable var f called f that is a sum of a and b, right? We can do a plus b, right? And then let's print that out. So 5 plus 5.1 is 10.1, right? So we'll print out 10, okay, yeah, 10.1. Right, so you can add that, or you can subtract it. You can subtract a minus b. So 5 minus 5.1 is, okay, so this is a cutoff error. Yeah, I'm not going to explain that today, but actually let's do b minus a since b is bigger, right? So it should be 0.1, but actually there's a complex error in all programming languages that makes the round off error. So I'm not going to explain that today, but yeah, that's what happened here. Let's just make b a whole number, right? Just to demonstrate the minus sign, right? 6 minus 5 is 1. Same for plus. You can also multiply, right? Using the asterisk symbol. If you put an asterisk there, that's multiply. So 6 times 5 is 30, right? Oop. Okay. 8. Did it save? Yeah, okay, it didn't save. So 6 times 5 is 30, right? You can also do division. So let's say b is 10. We can do 10 divided by 5 using the slash, which represents the division. So 10 divided by 5 is 2. And then we also have exponentiation, which is 2 asterisks. So let's say we want to a's variable a is 2, and then we have b. So let's say we wanted 2/3 power. We would do a double asterisk b. So that means since a is 2 and b is 3, then a double asterisk b is 2 to the 3rd power, which is 8. Yeah, and then, so somebody asked, can you just do A, B, right? Since in math class, you'll learn, you know, that two variables, to say that they're multiplying each other, you could also just put them right next to each other. You can't do that in a programming language, because it'll just think that there's supposed to be a variable called AB, and then it should assign that value. But since there is no value called a variable called AB, it won't work. And you'll notice that there's a error here. AB is not defined because the variable AB does not exist. So you can't do that. Yeah. If you have a question, just like type it in the chat. Yeah. 1 divided by 0 is infinity. I'm not sure what you're doing, but you're not, like, you can't divide by 0. So there's going to be some wacky stuff happening if you do stuff that is illegal in math, right? So yeah. And so when we use these assignment operators, you can, so the JavaScript follows the order of operations, right? So multiplication and division happens first, and then addition and subtraction. So let's say we have 3 variables, or I'll just make var c equal to 3 again, right? So what happens if you do 2 plus 3 times, or A plus B times C, right? So because it follows the order of operations, B times C happens first because multiplication comes before addition. Wait, what? Hold up. What did I do wrong here? It is correct. Oh my God, I'm so stupid. I just did math wrong. Oh, okay. Yeah, it is correct. 3 times 3 is 9, and then plus 2 is 11. Oh my God. Okay. Yeah, so it follows order of operations. Obviously, if you do, you can also add parentheses to do A plus B first. So A plus B is 5 times 3 is 15, and then it should give you 15. Yeah, and then we have another operator called modulus. The modulus operator is the percent symbol. So what it does is it gives you the remainder of a division. So if we have modulus B, B modulus A, that means we're first going to test 3 divided by 2. 3 divided by 2 gives you a remainder of 1. So therefore, variable f should be 1, and it print 1 right there. So modulus gives you the remainder. What happens, right? 2 modulus 3, then it'll just return the first number. So in that case, 2. Okay, so question. Can you crash someone's computer using a lot of variables? It might be possible. I don't think, like, it's like, you can't really do that though, because you're a human. I mean, unless you write like a few trillion variables and like it does something, then it might crash someone's computer. Or most of the time you crash someone's computer by having their computer like process something over and over and over again until the processor can't keep up, and then it crashes. And like I said, for encoding languages, you can't just say multiply that and then do that. That doesn't work. You have to do that first, right? And then another operator, a few other operators are the increment and decrement operators, right? So increment, obviously, it means add 1 to that. So if we do this, what will happen? You might think it's 3. It doesn't print 3. So what this does here, we put the increment operator after this variable name, is it'll increase the variable a. So it'll plus 1 to a. So a now equals 3. But if you put the increment operator after the variable in a statement, then this will happen second, and this will actually happen first. So in this case, f is still 2, even though a is 3, because we have the increment operator afterwards. And so it'll assign the variable f to the value of a first, and then add 1 to a. So a is now 3, but f is still 2. So the way to prevent this is if you put the increment or decrement operator in front of the variable first. So what this will do is it'll add 1 to a first, and then it'll assign the a value of to f, and therefore f equals 3 this time. Because first, it does this first, right? It pluses 1 to the value of a first, so that makes a 3, and then it'll assign the value of a to the value to variable f. Therefore, f equals 3. Same for decrement. Decrement is -1. It's 2 minus symbols, just like that. Okay. Jake, I'll send you the Google Classroom code after we finish this class. Yeah, so and then we also have assignment operators, right? So before we talked about the equal sign, which is the default assignment operator. It just means this equals that. So we're assigning the second value to the first value. We also have other assignment operators. We have plus equals, minus equals, times equals, divide equals, modulus equals, exponent equals. So what these mean is that basically if you have an arithmetic operator inside of in front of the assignment operator, then it'll just mean the first one equals that itself plus the second one. So in this case, it's plus equals. So x equals x plus y, x equals x minus y, and so on for the other ones. So those are the assignment operators. And note something, what you can do is, if you're doing print, you can do a plus b in here, and then it'll do 2 plus 3 equals 6, or 5. Oh my God. So you can use assignment operator there. You can also use a plus operator, the addition operator on strings. You can't use anything else, but you can use the plus sign on strings. So variable d, we assigned it to hello world. What if we only had two variables, variable f and which equals hello, and we have a variable g which equals world, right? How do you add them together? How do you splice them together? You can do var h equals f plus g. Now, if we print that, you'll notice that there's no space in between. Why is that? Because when we add them together, we didn't have any spaces. In this variable, there's no spaces. In this variable, there's no spaces either. So how do we add a space in between the two words when we're splicing them together? Oh no, we have a variable called f already, h, I. So I plus g. And then, so how do you add a space? You just have quotes and then put a space there and then put another plus sign to add a space in between. Okay. Okay, so someone is asking, since you said that the computer itself has no knowledge, how does the computer know that 2 plus 3 equals 5? Okay, so when the compiler or when the software reads through the code, there's some stuff that it already has been programmed to know. So like when they're developing the software, they coded it so that it would recognize that. So when we're coding JavaScript, we're actually coding a much more developed language that the computer already understands, and it's much more easier for us programmers to use. So it's much more easier to do. Yeah. I think, yeah, and then also comments. We had these comments here. Those are single line comments. You can have multi-line comments, which is slash asterisk and then asterisk slash, and then you could have multi-line comments that way. Yeah. So that's the end of class. There's no homework for this week, although I recommend if you don't know this stuff already, you should memorize it and play around with it a little bit. So now we have questions. If you have any questions, you can ask them now. Okay, so bye-bye, everyone. And also these slides are shared with you guys. So in a classroom. Oh, also, I was going to give you the Google Classroom code. Wait, who needed the Google Classroom code? Okay, Jake, I'll send you it through the chat right now. Yeah, that's the classroom code. Just write that down and then you can join. And as always, if you have any questions, just email me. And then also send me a copy of your code so that I can know what's happening. Well, somebody emailed me like an hour ago, so I'll answer that question like after class. Yeah, I'll post the JavaScript code onto Google Classroom after class. Okay, I think there's like no more questions. Annie, yes, I'll reply to you after class in an email.